Across the galaxy, far beyond the reach of most known civilizations, there was a peaceful race called the Valari. They were gentle beings who loved harmony more than war, knowledge more than conquest. Their worlds were beautiful, filled with forests of silver trees, calm oceans, and cities that seemed to float in the light of their twin suns. For generations they had known only peace, but peace, as the universe had often shown, can never last forever. The Valari had no army. They had never needed one. Their people were builders, scientists, and dreamers. They studied the stars not to conquer them, but to understand them. To them, violence was something ancient, a story told in old books. But when the Korath Dominion arrived, those stories became their reality. The Korath were not explorers, they were conquerors. Their ships were black as night, armed with weapons that could destroy cities from orbit. They gave no warnings, offered no negotiations. They simply arrived and took whatever they wanted. The first Valari colony that fell was small, located on the edge of their territory. At first, the Valari government thought it was a communication failure. Then the images began to come in smoke, fire, ruins. Their people running through streets lit by the glow of plasma fire. The Korath soldiers marched through the remains, their voices echoing through the transmissions. "Submit or burn," they said in a dozen alien tongues. Panic spread among the Valari. They had no warships, no weapons powerful enough to defend themselves. Their fleets were meant for trade, not combat. The scientists tried to adapt mining lasers into defense tools, but it was useless. Against the Korath, who had fought 100 wars before, the Valari were like children, trying to stop a storm with their hands. Their council met in secret chambers, trying to decide what to do. Many believed surrender was the only option. Others said they should run, hide their families, abandon their planets, and start again somewhere else. But one voice in the council, a scientist named Liran, stood up and said, "We cannot run forever. If we are to die, let us at least ask for help. Somewhere out there, someone must listen." It was a desperate idea, almost foolish. The Valari had heard stories of other civilizations, but they had never made contact with most of them. Still, they had nothing to lose. Their engineers worked day and night to create a long-range transmission, a signal that could travel across the galaxy. They sent it in every direction, across every known frequency. The message was simple: "We are the Valari. Our worlds are burning. Our people are dying. Is there anyone who will help us?" The message repeated itself every few seconds, echoing across the void of space. Then all they could do was wait. Days turned into weeks. Every day, new colonies were attacked. The Korath fleets moved like a plague, destroying everything they touched. The Valari watched as their skies filled with fire. Millions were lost. Still, no help came. They began to lose hope. In the great cities of the Valari homeworld, people gathered in silence around the transmission towers, hoping to hear a response. None came. The council met again, their faces heavy with grief. Some accused Liran of giving them false hope. Others simply wept. "No one will come," one elder said. "No one will risk their fleets for strangers." And in a cruel way, he was right. Across the galaxy, the message was heard by many powerful empires: the Archon League, the Varnus Dominion, the Sorel Coalition, but none of them responded. They all listened, analyzed, and then turned away. To them, the Valari were a lost cause. Why risk war against the Korath for a weak and distant race? Empires preferred stability over compassion. So they ignored the call, deleted the signal, and moved on. But the message did not die. It kept traveling through the vast darkness, passing through nebulae, asteroid fields, and dead systems where no life existed. It crossed the silent regions of space where only cosmic radiation sang. And then, after weeks of wandering, it reached a small blue planet on the edge of a spiral arm, a planet called Earth. The signal was weak when it arrived, distorted by distance and interference. But deep beneath the oceans, inside the massive network of human listening satellites and defense stations, something detected it. The signal was immediately flagged and decoded. At first, the analysts thought it was some kind of fake, a trap perhaps. But when they filtered the static, a clear voice emerged. It was trembling, filled with fear and sorrow. "We are the Valari. Our worlds are burning, please. Is there anyone who will help us?" The room went silent. The message was played again, then again. The scientists and military officers in charge stared at one another. Humanity had received hundreds of alien messages before: trade offers, warnings, exploration pings. but never a cry for help like this. It wasn't just a distress call. It was a plea for survival. The message was sent to Earth's Unified Defense Council within the hour. Leaders from across the planet gathered, watching the holographic projection of the Volari message. Some were moved to tears. Others were silent, their faces hard with thought. Humanity had fought its own wars, brutal, unforgiving ones. They knew what it meant to be helpless, to call for help and receive only silence. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then one of the admirals said quietly, "If we ignore them, we become no better than the ones who ignored us in our past." Another voice, an older general, leaned forward. "The Koreth Dominion," he said, reading the data. "They've slaughtered dozens of civilizations. If we go, it won't be a rescue. It will be a war." Still, the room remained firm. Humanity had evolved from survivors of a death world, a place where every living thing fought to live another day. They knew struggle. They knew loss. And above all, they knew what it meant to fight for someone who couldn't fight for themselves. By the end of the day, the vote was unanimous. The message from Earth was short but clear. It traveled back through the same stars, retracing the path the Volari's desperate plea had taken. Signal received. "Hold your ground. Help is coming." On the Volari homeworld, the few remaining signal officers almost couldn't believe what they were hearing. For a moment, they thought it was a trick, a cruel imitation sent by the Koreth to break their spirits. But then they heard the name of the world that had answered. Earth. The officers looked at one another in confusion. They had never heard of humans before. There were no records, no alliances, no treaties. Who were these people who had chosen to help them when so many others had turned away? The Volari didn't know it then, but they had just called upon the deadliest species in the galaxy. A species that didn't know how to surrender, didn't understand fear the same way others did. The Koreth would soon learn what kind of creatures lived on that small blue planet at the edge of the stars. And as the first human fleets began to move, the galaxy, silent for so long, was about to remember the price of ignoring a cry for help. To the rest of the galaxy, humans were still a mystery. They were a young species compared to the ancient empires that ruled the stars, yet their reputation had already spread far and wide. Other civilizations whispered stories about them, stories of a world where survival itself was a war. Earth, they said, was a death world, a place where every creature fought, where storms could swallow cities and where even the plants could kill. From such a place came the humans, unpredictable, clever, and frighteningly determined. Most of the galaxy kept its distance. Humanity had fought its way into the stars without help from anyone. While other species built their civilizations slowly, guided by ancient mentors, humans had clawed their way upward through chaos and destruction. Their history was full of wars. Wars against themselves, wars against nature, wars for freedom. To the galaxy's older races, they seemed violent and unstable. But to those who looked closer, there was something else in them, something that couldn't be ignored. They were survivors, so when the Volari's desperate message reached Earth, no one outside humanity expected them to care. Empires with fleets 1,000 times larger had ignored the plea. Why would a small, unpredictable species from a single blue planet risk everything for strangers? Most assumed the humans would delete the signal, study it for curiosity, and move on. But that wasn't what happened. The message came through one of the deep space relay stations orbiting Saturn. At first, the technicians thought it was interference, an old transmission bouncing through the void. But when they cleaned up the data, the voice of the Volari became clear. It wasn't a military message or a demand. It was a cry for help, trembling, full of fear, full of pain. "We are the Volari," the message said. "Our worlds are burning. Our people are dying. Please, is there anyone who will help us?" The technicians froze. They had heard many strange things in space, signals from distant suns, alien music, automated beacons, but never anything like this. They immediately sent the data to the United Earth Defense Council, the highest authority for interstellar affairs. Within hours, the message was being played in a secured chamber under the city of Geneva, where the council met. The room was filled with military leaders, diplomats, scientists, and representatives from all over Earth's colonies. For a few minutes, no one spoke. The message echoed through the chamber, haunting and desperate. When it ended, the silence was heavy. Some of the council members were cautious. "We don't know who they are," one of them said. "This could be a trap." The Korath Dominion is powerful. We can't fight a full-scale war in a region we barely know. But others disagreed. Admiral Rains, a veteran of a dozen space conflicts, stood and looked around the room. If we ignore them, he said quietly, then we are no better than those who ignored us when we cried out in our darkest days. He was referring to humanity's own past, a time before they had united, when nations had destroyed one another and no one came to help. The memory still burned deep in human history. To walk away now, to ignore another species begging for help, would go against everything humanity had learned the hard way. The debate lasted for hours. Some wanted to send aid quietly, just a few ships, maybe a medical convoy. Others argued that such small help would change nothing. The Korath would crush it like an insect. Finally, the president of the council stood up and said, "We either help them completely, or we do not help at all." There was silence again. Then, one by one, the members of the council voted. Every hand was raised. Unanimous. Humanity would answer the Valari's call. That night, every major shipyard on Earth and its colonies came alive. The sound of engines being tested, the roar of reactors, the hum of armor plating being fitted. It was the sound of a species preparing for war. In orbit above Mars, the Fleet Command Center flashed with new orders. Battle groups that had been resting or patrolling nearby sectors were redirected. Within hours, the human armada began to form. When the fleets moved, the stars seemed to darken. Thousands of ships, from small frigates to colossal carriers, aligned in perfect formation. Their hulls bore the scars of old wars, burns, impact marks, and weld lines that told stories of survival. They didn't polish their ships for beauty. Every mark was a reminder of what it took to live on a death world, what it took to fight and endure. Each vessel carried more than just weapons. They carried people who believed that no one deserved to die alone. They carried soldiers who remembered what it meant to lose everything. They carried engineers, medics, and volunteers, all ready to face an enemy they had never met for a people they had never seen. The commanders gave final orders. Communications officers transmitted one message back to the Valari, carried through encrypted channels across the void. It was short, simple, and full of human resolve. Signal received. Hold your ground. Help is coming. Those 5 words traveled faster than light through silent space and dying systems until they reached the Valari homeworld. There, in the ruins of their command center, the surviving officers couldn't believe what they were hearing. For weeks they had sent messages and no one had answered. Now, finally, a response had come, from a species they didn't even know existed. Many of them didn't understand who the humans were. Their databases held only a few fragments about Earth, a planet with unstable climates and unpredictable people. Some thought it was a trick. Others wept because even if it was a lie, at least someone had listened. But it was no lie. Back on Earth, massive jump drives began to charge. The fleet's reactors flared like miniature suns. Space itself seemed to tremble as hundreds of ships entered hyperspace together. It was a sight that few in the galaxy had ever witnessed, a death world's children answering a cry for help. Inside the ships, the crews were silent. Each of them knew what was at stake. They had seen what conquerors like the Korath could do. They had seen whole worlds burn, and they were determined that this time things would be different. For the Valari, the humans were still a mystery. They didn't know that humanity had spent centuries fighting not because they loved war, but because they had to. They didn't know that every victory had been bought with blood and sacrifice. They didn't know that on Earth the instinct to protect was as strong as the instinct to survive. As the fleet cut through the void, humanity carried more than weapons. They carried a message to the stars. That compassion, even from a death world, could be stronger than fear. That even the deadliest species could fight not just for themselves, but for others. And somewhere, beyond the edge of the galaxy, a young race from a dangerous world prepared to show the universe exactly what it meant when humans answered a call for help. The Valari homeworld hung in the darkness, surrounded by death. The Korath Armada had arrived in full force, their massive black warships forming a ring around the planet like vultures waiting for a dying prey to stop breathing. The skies above the Valari cities burned red from constant bombardment. Entire continents glowed with fire as orbital strikes tore through their defenses. For the Valari, it was the end. Their defense towers had fallen silent, their last communication satellites destroyed. The few ships they had were hiding underground, powerless, families huddled in shelters, listening to the endless rumble of explosions from above. The Korath gave them one final message, broadcast on every channel: surrender or be erased. The Valari Council gathered in what was left of their government complex. They had already voted surrender. There was no other choice. They couldn't fight an empire that had ruled this sector for hundreds of years. Their leader stood quietly, watching the sky through cracked glass domes as enemy warships drifted like metal giants above the clouds. The youngest among them whispered, "Maybe if we surrender, they'll let some of us live." But before the council could send their surrender message, something strange happened. The stars outside began to change. At first, no one noticed. Just a faint flicker in the distance like a star blinking out. Then another, and another. The Valari astronomers inside the command tower looked at their scanners in confusion. "Gravitational anomalies," one said softly. "Something is coming through." Then the void itself seemed to tear apart. A wave of blinding white light flashed across the dark sky as massive shapes emerged from hyperspace. The sensors screamed with readings the Valari had never seen before, ships larger than anything they'd ever imagined. Human warships. They appeared in perfect formation, silent and steady. No introduction, no warning. Just the quiet hum of engines and the distant echo of power building in their weapons. The Korath fleets, shocked by the sudden arrivals, turned their ships to face the newcomers. For the first time in centuries, the conquerors didn't know who they were facing. The Valari watched from the surface, wide-eyed, as streaks of light crossed the sky. Then in an instant, the first human salvo was fired. It wasn't loud. It wasn't messy. It was precise, terrifyingly precise. Beams of concentrated energy lanced through the void, cutting through the black hulls of Korath cruisers like blades through paper. One by one, the enemy ships exploded silently in the vacuum of space, their fireball reflections painting the night sky above the Valari cities. The ground trembled from the shockwaves. The Valari children hiding in shelters thought it was the end, but it wasn't the end of their world. It was the end of the invaders. The Korath fleet panicked. Their commanders shouted orders, trying to regroup, trying to return fire, but they were too slow. The humans had already moved. Their ships danced through the battlefield like predators, each movement cold and calculated. Their second strike came moments later, heavier, deadlier, unstoppable. Missiles with artificial intelligence swarmed through the chaos, weaving between debris, targeting engines and command bridges with uncanny accuracy. Within hours, the once proud Korath Armada, a fleet that had crushed civilizations for generations, was nothing more than drifting wreckage. The space above the Valari homeworld was filled with the remains of burning ships and frozen bodies. From the planet's surface, the Valari watched in disbelief. The sky that had been full of death was now lit by the light of explosions, each one a small sun fading into silence. Their enemies, who had once called themselves the masters of this sector, were being erased in front of their eyes. Inside the human command ship UNS Resolute, the scene was controlled and silent. The crew moved with the calmness of people who had done this before. There were no cheers, no emotions, just orders followed and targets destroyed. Admiral Rain stood at the front of the bridge, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. His voice was calm. "No survivors in enemy command clusters. Focus on capital ships. Leave escape pods. Let them tell the story." The officers nodded. They knew what that meant. Humanity didn't need to boast. Their actions spoke louder than words. Every maneuver, every shot was executed with deadly precision. This wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. It was a rescue, performed by warriors who had learned long ago that mercy and war sometimes wore the same face. One of the younger officers, watching the Korath ships burn, whispered, "Sir." "This is overkill." The admiral didn't turn his head. His voice remained steady. "No, this is clarity. We end it fast so no one else suffers." Down on the surface, the Valari communications team received a signal. It was brief, simple, just one transmission from the human flagship. "This is Earth Fleet Command. Stay in shelters. The enemy is being neutralized." The Valari scientists stared at the message, unable to speak. Earth? They searched their records. The name was barely a footnote in galactic archives. A death world species, unstable, dangerous. And yet they had come, and they were winning. Above the planet, The battle entered its final phase. The Korath flagship, enormous and heavily armored, tried to escape. Its engines flared, tearing through debris fields, but the humans were already ahead. A single human dreadnought changed course, engines burning bright. It launched a focused kinetic strike, a weapon that didn't explode but hit with pure physical force. It tore straight through the Korath command ship's hull, slicing it in half. The flagship disintegrated into molten fragments, the shockwave lighting up the battlefield like dawn. Silence followed. The fight was over. The mighty Korath Dominion had been defeated in a matter of hours by a species the galaxy had barely acknowledged, but humanity didn't celebrate. Their ships didn't broadcast victory songs or send demands. They began search and rescue operations immediately. Dropships entered the atmosphere, scanning for survivors, helping the wounded Valari. Soldiers in black armor carried supplies, not guns. They moved through the ruins of cities, helping pull survivors from collapsed shelters, setting up medical tents and treating the injured. The Valari, still in shock, could only stare. These weren't conquerors. These weren't invaders. They were saviors. Terrifying ones, yes, but saviors nonetheless. And yet behind their kindness there was something else, a quiet, cold understanding in their eyes. The way they looked at the ruins, the destroyed enemy ships, the dead civilians, it was as if they had seen it all before. As if this wasn't the first time they had answered a desperate call like this. The Valari elder who met Admiral Rains asked him, "Why did you come? You owed us nothing." The Admiral looked at the ruined horizon, his voice low. "Because once we were like you, and no one came for us." Those words stayed with the Valari for generations. Humanity had fought not out of duty, but out of memory, out of understanding what it meant to be alone in the dark, begging for someone to answer. As the human fleet prepared to leave orbit, the once blue skies of the Valari world were clear again. The debris of the Korath armada drifted above, silent reminders of the day death came, and was defeated by something even deadlier. The galaxy would soon hear about what had happened. Empires would whisper in fear, wondering how such a young species could destroy an ancient armada so easily. But for the Valari, one truth became clear. The humans didn't come with speeches or promises. They came with purpose, with discipline, with the strength of those who had lived through their own extinction and survived. And as their ships disappeared back into the stars, the Valari understood what kind of allies they had found. Not angels, not monsters, but something far more powerful. Survivors who had turned their pain into strength. The deadliest species in the galaxy. When the battle finally ended, silence returned to the Valari homeworld, but it was not a peaceful silence. It was the kind that comes after chaos, heavy and full of memories that no one wanted to remember. The once beautiful cities of the Valari were now broken, filled with dust and smoke. Buildings that had stood for centuries were reduced to ruins. The sky was still dark from the ashes of war, and the air carried the smell of burned metal and loss. The Valari people stepped out of their shelters slowly, afraid that the Korath might still be waiting. But the ships in the sky were not black anymore. They were silver and gray, marked with the emblem of a blue and white world. Earth. The invaders were gone, destroyed by the humans who had come out of nowhere. Yet even in victory, the Valari were afraid. They had heard stories about humans, the Deathworlders, the warriors from the cursed blue planet where even nature tried to kill them. The stories said that humans were violent, unpredictable, and ruthless. So when the Valari survivors saw human soldiers landing on their soil, they expected the worst. They thought the humans would demand everything: land, wealth, and loyalty. They thought the price of salvation would be servitude. The Council prepared themselves for negotiations they could not win. But what happened next was something no one had predicted. The first human soldiers who stepped out of their landing craft didn't raise their weapons. Instead, they began unloading supplies. Crates of food, medical kits, and shelter materials were carried out carefully. Human engineers followed, setting up power generators and communication towers. Medics moved through the ruins, scanning for injured Valari, tending to them with quiet efficiency. The Valari stood in silence, watching as the supposed monsters from the death world knelt beside their wounded, offering them water and bandages. Some Valari even cried when they saw human soldiers carrying alien children out of collapsed shelters, covering them with blankets. In the ruins of the capital city, a human officer approached the Valari Council. He removed his helmet and bowed slightly. "Admiral Rains sends his respects," he said. "He asks that you rest. We'll take care of the wounded." The Valari leader, Elder Lyran, stared in disbelief. "You do not ask for tribute?" she asked quietly. "No payment?" The officer shook his head. "We came because you asked for help. That's all." Those words spread across the city like a miracle. The humans, the deadliest species in the galaxy, had come not as conquerors but as protectors. While the Valari wept for their lost homes, human soldiers worked tirelessly beside them. They didn't complain. They didn't boast. They just worked. For days, the two species rebuilt together. Human engineers used their machines to lift fallen buildings and restore water lines. Their doctors taught the Valari how to treat radiation burns. Their soldiers stood guard at night, scanning the skies to make sure no Koreth ships returned. One evening, a group of Valari children approached a human soldier sitting near a campfire. The soldier smiled and handed them pieces of dried fruit from his ration pack. The children hesitated at first, then accepted. For the first time in months, laughter returned to the Valari streets. The humans didn't just rebuild structures, they rebuilt hope. In every corner of the ruined world, they placed memorials, small metal plaques engraved with names. Some were Valari names, others were human. They didn't separate them. To the humans, all who had fallen were part of the same story. The story of those who fought and died so others could live. Elder Lyran visited one of these memorials. She ran her hand across the cold metal, reading the human names she could barely pronounce. "Why?" she asked the human admiral when they finally met. "Why do your people fight for others?" Admiral Rains stood quietly for a long moment before answering. "Because we remember what it's like to be alone," he said. "Once no one came for us. We decided that if anyone ever called for help again, we would not make them wait." Those words touched every Valari heart. They realized that beneath the armor and the weapons, the humans were not monsters. They were survivors who had learned compassion the hard way. As the reconstruction continued, messages from other parts of the galaxy began flooding in. Some were full of praise, others of fear. Empires that had ignored the Valari's distress signal were now watching Earth closely. Who were these humans who could destroy the Koreth armada in hours, and then spend weeks rebuilding what wasn't theirs? In their desperation, the Valari had called for saviors, and they had received something far more complex. The humans were not saints. They were powerful, dangerous, and deeply scarred. But they were also kind in a way the galaxy had forgotten. After several weeks, when the Valari cities were stable and their people were safe again, the human fleet prepared to leave. The day they departed, thousands of Valari gathered on the hills outside their rebuilt capital to watch the warships ascend. The air shimmered with the light of their engines. Elder Lyran stood with Admiral Rains near the landing zone. "We will never forget what your people have done," she said. "How can we ever repay you?" The Admiral smiled faintly. "You don't owe us anything," he replied. "Just remember, that's all we ask." The Valari nodded, but they didn't understand what he meant until later that day. Before the last human ship jumped into hyperspace, a transmission went out across every open channel in the galaxy. It wasn't coded or hidden. It was meant for everyone to hear. The message was clear and calm, spoken in Admiral Rains's voice. "When you cry for help," he said, "we answer. But understand this, kind, when we come, we do not come in peace alone." The message was simple, but it shook the galaxy. To some, it was a warning. To others, it was a promise. The empires that had ignored the Valari's plea now listened in silence, realizing what kind of force had just entered galactic politics. Humanity had declared its presence, and not as conquerors, but as guardians who carried both mercy and wrath in equal measure. On the Valari world, the survivors gathered around their new monuments, listening to the human transmission echo across the stars. Many cried. They had been saved by beings they had once feared, beings who carried destruction in one hand and compassion in the other. That night, as the human ships disappeared into the stars, the Valari looked up at the sky and whispered prayers of gratitude. The smoke still hung over their cities, and the scars of war would take years to fade, but they no longer felt alone. Somewhere out there, beyond the endless dark, was a world that had answered their call, and every child born after that day was taught the same truth, that when Deathworlders come to your aid, they bring both salvation and fire. They do not come to conquer, but neither do they come softly. They come as they are, forged in war, tempered by pain, and driven by the unbreakable will to protect. The Volari would rebuild their civilization, stronger than before, and on every rebuilt tower, they engraved the same words. When you cry for help, they will answer. And when they come, they will change everything. It was a memory, a warning, and a promise. One born from the day humanity showed the galaxy that even the deadliest species could be the most compassionate of all. Word of the great battle traveled faster than any starship, faster than light itself. In every corner of the galaxy, from the frozen moons of the Kareth Dominion to the shining cities of the Tyrell Ascendancy, beings of every shape and kind spoke the same name in hushed voices. Humans, it began as a rumor. Someone had heard that the Volari homeworld had been under siege by the Koreth, a brutal empire known for leaving nothing alive in their path. The Volari had sent desperate pleas for help across the stars, and everyone had ignored them. The larger empires, and the wealthy, the powerful, the arrogant, all stayed silent. They saw the Volari as weak and unimportant. No one wanted to risk their fleets for a small world on the edge of nowhere. Then something unexpected happened. A species most had dismissed as dangerous and unpredictable, the Death Worlders called humans, had answered the call. No one knew why. No one understood how they even heard the signal. But one thing was certain. When the humans came, the war ended. The Koreth fleet had been one of the largest in that sector. Thousands of warships, planet-killer weapons, and soldiers without mercy. Yet within hours of human arrival, the entire armada was destroyed. The skies above Valar burned with fire and lightning. Sensors across nearby systems picked up impossible readings, energy outputs and weapon signatures that made no sense. Some who watched from afar said it looked less like a battle and more like the end of the world. When the dust settled, the Koreth were gone. Completely gone. Their fleet had been erased. No one knew how the humans did it. Some said they used weapons forbidden by the galactic treaties. Others claimed they fought like creatures possessed, relentless, fearless, unstoppable. Whatever the truth, the outcome was clear. Humanity had changed the balance of power in a single day. As the news spread, different worlds reacted in different ways. Some called the humans saviors. They praised them for saving the Volari when no one else dared to intervene. The smaller, weaker civilizations, the ones who had lived in constant fear, found new hope. They whispered prayers to Earth, believing that maybe, just maybe, someone in the galaxy cared. But not everyone saw it that way. The great empires, those built on conquest and pride, began to whisper another word: monsters. They saw the recordings of the human warships tearing through the Koreth lines like predators. They analyzed every image, every sound, every transmission. The humans didn't fight for glory. They fought to end the fight, completely and without mercy. Those who watched realized something terrifying. If humanity ever turned its fleets against them, no defense would be enough. No shield, no weapon, no alliance could stop them. Meetings were held in the grand councils of powerful races. The leaders of entire empires gathered to discuss this new threat. Some argued that humanity must be feared. Others said they should be befriended. But none of them could ignore what had happened on Valar. Meanwhile, on the ruined Volari homeworld, life was slowly beginning again. The humans stayed for weeks after the battle, helping rebuild cities, restoring communication towers, and healing the wounded. Their ships hovered in orbit like silent guardians, watching for any sign of danger. The Volari worked beside them, learning about these strange warriors who had come from a planet so harsh that even their oceans could kill. They listened to human laughter, their songs, their stories of storms and struggle. And slowly, fear turned into admiration. Children followed human engineers around, copying their movements and asking endless questions. Farmers worked beside human technicians, replanting crops with earth-grown seeds that could survive in damaged soil. Soldiers who once trembled at the sight of human armor now shared food and stories by firelight. The Volari had never known protectors like this, beings who could destroy entire fleets, yet kneel to rebuild a broken village. Under their protection, the Volari world began to heal. The cities rose again from the ashes, stronger and brighter than before. They built new monuments not just for their own fallen, but for the humans who had died defending them. Across every memorial, one phrase was engraved in both languages. They came when no one else did. Even after the human fleet finally departed, their presence remained. The skies were empty, but the Volari knew they were being watched. Human satellites and patrols stayed nearby, ensuring no enemy dared to return. For the first time in generations, the Valari slept without fear. But far away across the galaxy, that peace created unease. In the grand halls of the Terrell Senate, someone whispered, "What happens if they come for us next?" In the war rooms of the Krivon Empire, admirals studied human battle recordings, trying to understand their tactics, and failing. "They don't fight for conquest," one general said grimly. "They fight like they're defending something precious." "What?" another asked. The general looked at the screen where a human soldier was seen carrying a wounded Valari child through the rubble. "Life," he said quietly. "They fight for life." It was a strange paradox, a species both feared and admired. The same beings who could level worlds also rebuilt them. The same hands that launched missiles also planted trees. Over time, stories spread across the stars. Some were exaggerated, others almost myth. Tales of the Deathworlders who answered distress calls no one else would. They said if your world ever sent an SOS into the void, and the humans heard it, you would be saved. But your enemies would be destroyed, and always. There was that single truth whispered in every shadowed corner of the galaxy. When the deadliest species in the galaxy answers your call for help, the war never ends the same way again. For the Valari, that truth was a blessing. For others, it was a warning. Years later, Valari children grew up under the safety of that legend. They looked up at the stars and dreamed of visiting Earth one day, the home of the warriors who came from a world that tried to kill them. And because of that, they learned how to survive anything. The Valari artists painted great murals of human warships surrounded by light. Poets wrote about the day the sky burned with salvation. And scholars taught that the arrival of the humans marked a turning point in history, the moment when the galaxy realized that compassion could come wrapped in armor, and mercy could arrive in the form of a warship. But in the hidden chambers of other empires, leaders prepared their defenses. They spoke of peace but built new weapons. They signed treaties with Earth, smiling during public meetings, while secretly wondering how to protect themselves if those same smiling humans ever turned their gaze toward them. No one dared to provoke them. No one ignored a distress signal anymore, and because they all remembered Valar. They all remembered what happened when one desperate cry for help reached the wrong, or perhaps the right, ears. And so, across countless worlds, the legend of humanity grew. To some, they were saviors. To others, monsters. But everyone agreed on one thing. Humanity was not to be underestimated, because when Deathworlders answer your call, they bring more than hope. They bring power, fury, and a promise that the war will end, but never the same way again. And somewhere far away on Earth, the humans listened to the stars, waiting for the next voice to cry out for help, ready once more to remind the galaxy who they truly were.